CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe. Live from CGTN in London, I'm Andrew Wilson.
And I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories today. The Taliban warns foreign troops they must leave by the end of this month as the group consolidates its control over Afghanistan.
We're live in Brussels as 2 evacuation flights arrive carrying Afghan refugees.
Meanwhile, China reports no new local coronavirus cases for the first time since July, and the stock markets respond.
Shares surge in British supermarket giant Sainsbury's on reports it could be next in line for a private equity takeover. And meals and megabytes, robotic chefs cause a stir in Shanghai. Good evening. Taliban forces in Afghanistan have warned there will be no extension to allow foreign troops to stay in the country beyond the end of the month. US President Joe Biden had previously hinted that US forces could stay beyond their August 31st exit deadline in order to evacuate all Americans and other allied staff.
Meanwhile, Taliban fighters say they've surrounded opposition forces who've massed in the Panjshir Valley in northern Afghanistan. And as chaotic scenes continue at the airport in Kabul, 1 Afghan soldier has been killed in a gunfire attack. Let's take you live then to Kabul, speak to Zamarialai Abbasin, who's there. Thanks for talking to us. So the Taliban then are insisting there will be no extension for troops to leave. Are they going to stick to that, do you think, or is it simply a negotiating tactic?
Hello, Polly. The Taliban have been stressing about a lot of things since the peace process in Afghanistan started, like prisoner release and other issues, but they were reflexible when it comes to negotiation, of course. And in this regard, Taliban will only show their seriousness toward the evacuation of international forces and U.S. forces from Afghanistan. But the situation come very sudden, and that's why it's understandable, and many talks that the Taliban also understand this, because they want better relationship, the international recognition, and much more needs that Taliban potential government will need in future. And at the end of the day, it's expected that Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan peace, will step up again, and they can negotiate all these issues. When it comes to Taliban spokesperson and delegation member Sohail Shaheen, he has been always talking such ways, and they just want to show their seriousness towards the exit of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. But many believe it's still negotiable.
And in terms of the Taliban's response to the humanitarian crisis that's clearly unfolding, everyone's seeing it across the world, are we any closer to knowing what sort of government the Taliban will take, and indeed what line they will take on humanitarian lines?
Well, the Taliban have started negotiation with different parties and political figures and sides to war in Afghanistan, and they have been stressing that they already engaged in negotiation. Many of the former government's governors are already engaged with the same system that Taliban have been talked about, and other commanders which were in war, in direct conflict with the Taliban. So again, the Taliban looks very reflexible, and internally and internationally they will be ready about the negotiation, because when we see their recent struggles since the collapse of Kabul, they have been doing a lot of the things. They have appointed their own officials at the same time, like Kabul Mayor, health minister, are still on their own positions and already engaged with more than 20 other political figures, and they are willing to talk about everything. Even Panjshir issue, they are willing to talk, so they are seeking international recognition and international support. That's why Taliban are also reflexible in this regard, and they will come up with a different face. I've been walking through the city this evening, and everything was looking much normal. People are getting out, the traffic jam and the crowds, and also the cafes, the restaurants and malls already open, and it was very soon. No one was expecting it a week ago. So it seems like Taliban will do their inclusive government initiative, and they will be engaged in different parts inside and outside the country to finally reach their own inclusive government. And the leadership is something priority, and it's unnegotiable for the Taliban.
Things returning very slowly to order in Kabul. Good to hear that, Zamarilai Abbasine. Thank you very much indeed.
Britain's Prime Minister will use G7 emergency talks to put pressure on the US over Afghanistan. Boris Johnson called Tuesday's meeting of world leaders and intends to ask Joe Biden to extend the deadline for US withdrawal in order to keep evacuation flights running. Well, Naweed Jabakal joins me now. Naweed, whichever way you look at it, this is going to be a difficult conversation.
Absolutely. What makes it tougher is that the United States and Taliban have reached this deal for the US to pull out by August 31st. So there's not much leverage there for Boris Johnson immediately from the off. Since the middle of August, we've heard President Biden say more than 30,000 people have been evacuated on US flights. The majority of that have been the citizens that the US has been getting out. Other nations also taking plenty out. If you look at the UK's figures, Ben Wallace says 6,600. The Defence Secretary says 6,600 have been evacuated. We understand that it's about 2,000 more that need to be brought out, possibly less than that, and that's largely Afghan staff now. But the situation there, even though it's more organised, it still is very precarious, still very dangerous. We saw today the death of one Afghan soldier. Aside from that, international troops are manning this. In recent days, we've been hearing a lot about a possible terror threat. You've got lots of international military forces in one area with lots of civilians as well. And then there's the conditions to worry about for the ordinary people, many of whom are stuck outside Kabul airport. We've heard from the Pentagon in the last hour or so who says that that's front and centre of what they're thinking about as well.
There's a lot of people, and they are desperate. And we are trying to do the best we can to get them out of harm's way as fast as possible. And when you have a throughput problem, it means that some people are going to be stuck in a given location, whether it's at Hamid Karzai International Airport or Qatar or other temporary safe havens. Nobody wants to see this go on for any longer than it has to be.
It's clear for all to see, isn't it, that, you know, all of a sudden the UK is obsessed with Afghanistan when nothing was said diplomatically over the last couple of months. I mean, what represents any kind of progress for the UK government in these talks?
Yeah, well, and the fact is that the structural weaknesses were there for quite some time. The rise of the Taliban, the weaknesses and the infighting among the Afghan government, which has been the case over several years. So, in a way, the conditions were right for the Taliban to move in without even firing a shot to take over Kabul. But in terms of what Boris Johnson will do now, I think the tactic for these Western nations involved, it's not just Boris Johnson. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas coming out a short while ago saying that they were in talks with Turkey as well as the US to try and extend that August 31st deadline. So it's not just Boris Johnson who's calling for this, but other members of the G7 who will meet tomorrow. I think any form of an extension is going to be a matter of days and weeks rather than months. The priority is to get their nationals and staff out. But when it comes to the UK's role, important to remember that it took most of its troops out of Afghanistan in 2014. In terms of leverage, it doesn't have a great deal there. It's been the United States which has been bankrolling this war for the past few years. President Biden last night in his press conference said by some measures it's been $150 million a day. By some measures it's been $300 million a day. That's been one reason why he's been keen to pull people out. But in terms of what we can hear from Boris Johnson tomorrow, I think there's going to be a big focus on humanitarian crisis and preventing a refugee crisis from spilling over not just into Western states but also in surrounding states and causing security concerns. And then aside from that, the big question, how do we deal with the Taliban?
Well, I was going to say is, at the moment they're all talking to each other, these G7 leaders, but the point of this meeting originally was to pave a way forward. At some point, the West is going to have to start exchanging information and negotiations with the authority in Kabul.
Absolutely, and at the moment it seems that the Taliban is the dominant force there. There are pockets of resistance, particularly in the Panjshir Valley, we have been hearing. But the peculiarity of Afghanistan is it's always been a nation where foreign powers have had a great role. So it's not just the likes of the Taliban now who are the dominant force, who appear determined to push ahead with some form of government, but also other regional powers, and that's why you've seen the Germans talking to Turkey. But there are other players in the region, the likes of China, the likes of Russia, the likes of Pakistan, Iran. all bordering nations and all looking to have a say and protect their own interests there as well.
It's a good thing they've all had their summer holidays then. Noeed, thanks very much indeed.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that brimming refugee crisis that appears to be stoking up. European countries continuing to fly citizens and Afghans out of the country. Let's speak to Tony Waterman in Brussels. Tony, thanks for talking to us. Which EU countries then are doing their bit? Where are these Afghans going?
Well, Polly, it's a bit split if you want to know the truth, but today we had the first flights coming in of Afghan evacuees here in Belgium. There were 2 flights that touched down early this morning, bringing in a total of 226 people. These are mainly Belgian and also Afghans who had worked on international missions, working with those NATO forces. They are considered to be, of course, very vulnerable now in their home country because of the Taliban takeover. And France, we know that they have been removing personnel, diplomats, vulnerable people as well, for weeks now, really starting in May. And when they started doing that in May, a lot of people and critics said that they were being very pessimistic about that situation. But now we see that this is what every country is trying to do at this moment, to get out as many people as quickly as possible. They saw that the situation there on the ground was deteriorating rather quickly. Germany has also brought in some Afghan refugees, and the Chancellor Angela Merkel is saying that at least 10,000 of them need to be coming to Germany, although unsure if that's going to actually happen. Don't forget, this is an election year there, and migration is still a very sensitive topic. Other countries in Europe, they are not being as hospitable. The Chancellor of Austria saying that as long as he is in power, that his country will not be voluntarily accepting any asylum seekers. And we also heard from the Prime Minister of Slovenia, which is at the helm, of course, of the rotating EU presidency right now, saying that Europe will not open up this gateway to migration to prevent a repeat of that 2015 migration crisis, where we saw more than 1 million refugees and migrants coming in from war-torn Syria. But take a listen to what the president of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, had to say earlier today on this topic.
It is clear that the dramatic Afghan crisis also affects Europe. The defeat of the West questions our identity in the global context. But we cannot become bewildered and helpless spectators. We need to ensure security for those who, during 20 years, have collaborated with us and trusted us.
We cannot become bewildered spectators, he said. To what extent can those bosses in Brussels, those EU mandarins, if you like, order its member states to take in refugees? We've seen reluctance on the part of Greece, as you mentioned before, with this brand new Trump-style wall. And then, of course, particularly Turkey saying, therefore, they don't want any Afghan migrants.
Yeah, this is really an Achilles heel for the European Union. After that 2015 migration crisis, the top officials, countries, governments, they vowed that they were going to fix this problem. They were going to come up with a new way, a better, more efficient, fair distribution model when it comes to migration. And they just have not done that. Last year, the European Commission put forward a proposal for a new redistribution model, which would, in some cases, force countries to take in refugees. These would be in very limited situations. Otherwise, they'd have to be responsible for returning asylum seekers whose applications were rejected. But this is really a stalled proposal at this point, and there's very little appetite at the moment to move it forward. What Europe has done instead is that they have outsourced the work to other countries, non-EU countries. They have this very expensive arrangement with Turkey right now, where they provide billions of dollars in aid in exchange for Turkey preventing these migrants from crossing the Aegean into Greece. And it has worked fairly well. There's been a big drop-off in the number of migrants coming to Europe in the last years. But it also gives Ankara a lot of leverage in the relationship. And this is something that many in Europe are very, very uncomfortable with. And it leaves them very exposed. So borders are a national issue in Europe, of course. And this is why we've seen some of these countries take their own steps on this issue. Greece putting up that 40-kilometer, 25-mile-long wall to keep out migrants for a potential flood coming in to its country.
Tony Waterman, thank you very much indeed.
Well, as Tony was just saying there from Brussels, Afghanistan's political turmoil has brought these fears of another massive refugee crisis across Europe, and Turkey is under renewed pressure from the EU to take people in. But Turkey's President Erdogan says they're already full, a message he gave to German Chancellor Merkel and EC President Charles Michel during talks at the weekend. Michel Bardavid reports now from Antalya.
Well, Turkey's stance is clear right now. Turkey expects the EU to take more responsibility and has emphasized that it cannot take more responsibility for other countries. Instead, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone conversation with EU Council President Charles Michel last night. He stated that Turkey cannot handle a new wave of immigration. He stated that the EU should help Afghans in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries such as Iran. He stated that Turkey is hosting 5 million refugees at the moment and that Turkey cannot take the burden of more immigration at this time. It was also noted that the EU had requested that Turkey accepts local personnel that worked with the EU mission in Afghanistan. However, Erdogan emphasized that Turkey is not going to take the responsibility of the international community for third countries, also stating that the Turkish president also talked with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He gave similar messages to him as well, stating that if necessary precautions are not taken, that a new crisis will be inevitable. Meanwhile, hundreds of Afghans reportedly entered Turkey in the beginning of the month as well illegally. And right now, the situation is very difficult for them as well. For the Afghans in Turkey right now, there's nowhere to stay. There's nowhere to go. They don't have any work. They don't have any place to stay. So right now, they are facing a different kind of survival in Turkey at the moment, as Turkey's stance is that it is not going to take illegal crossings at the border and it is not going to take the burden of more immigration.
Charles Bardavid reporting there. Well, still to come on the programme. We're in Russia as President Putin tells Central Asian leaders he's worried that developments in Afghanistan could bring a resurgence of ISIS.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe live from CGTN in London. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN Europe and the CGTN app. And of course, we're in the UK, available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Well, European stocks have staged a comeback, with traders taking advantage of last week's sell-off. Germany's BioNTech shares are up more than 10% after the US Food and Drug Administration gave full approval to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. The spread of the virus is still concerning investors, though, who are looking at business and manufacturing data for signs that the Delta variant is slowing the global economic recovery. Well, despite the global surge in cases, US stocks also opened higher. The pandemic, however, continues to prove a problem for car manufacturers, stalling production. Ford, America's second-largest automaker, has been forced to shut down for a week because of the ongoing chip shortage. For more, John Terrett joins us now from New York. John, good to talk to you. These problems with the motor industry, is that across the board?
Andrew, Polly, it does seem to be. Let me tell you the story. Basically, Ford warned us this was going to happen a couple of months ago. They've been very, very hard hit by this microchip crisis that is going on. And one of the reasons that it's happened, let me tell you, is whoever is the buyer for all big three auto manufacturers in Detroit phoned up somebody in Asia and said, look, put a hold on the microchips, will you? We're not going to sell as many vehicles because of the COVID crisis, so we'll let you know when we need any more. We have plenty around the back for now. And then what happened here was, with all this stimulus money and all the checks washing around and goodness knows what else, some people, yes, needed to spend that day to day just to get by, but others didn't. And they've been buying automobiles, new ones and especially used ones as well. And so now all the big car manufacturers are simply beginning to run out of microchips. So today, Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas, it's right on the border of the two states. It's a big assembly plant. Ford uses it to make the F-150, which is America's most popular pickup truck, and it's closing for a week. And this is because of an outbreak of COVID in Malaysia, apparently. So it'll be closed from today over there in Kansas City, Missouri. It'll be closed from today through until next Monday, and they're going to cancel a shift on Saturday as well. And as you say, it's not just Ford. General Motors has been up to this as well. And indeed, Toyota last week shocked everybody by saying they're going to cut back their production by some 40% in Japan and here in the US, where they make vehicles in Indiana, in the north of the country, and then Kentucky and Texas in the south, and that's for the same reason. And then one footnote, which we've just spotted over here, BYD, which is a major manufacturer of automobiles and batteries and things in Guangzhou, in Shenzhen, in China, they were going to have an IPO, an initial public offering for their battery division. It's been called off for the same reason, because of the chip shortage. Andrew and Polly?
And yet, John, starting with Asia, things are looking a little rosier this week.
Yes, yes. I mean, we had a bad week in New York last week. It was the worst week for the Dow since June, but things have completely turned around here. And the reason is because Asia was buoyed by comments on COVID-19 coming out of China today. So the Nikkei was up about 2%. The others over there, the Shanghai market, Hong Kong, Kospi, the All Ords over in Sydney, all up by between 0.5% and 1% each. China saying it's had no new COVID cases since July and that the Delta variant is waning. Now, I have to tell you, it's my duty to tell you that is not necessarily believed here at the New York Stock Exchange, but that is what China says. And it is slightly surprising that there was a rally in Asia on Monday, because in Japan they've got the private sector being hit by the worst wave they've had there yet, denting their chances of trying to catch up with the Chinese economy. And in Australia, of course, Sydney now has a major outbreak going on, and Scott Morrison, who's the Prime Minister there, is battling with the Australian states over trying to get them to reopen again. And he said that we probably can't eliminate COVID-19 from Australia forever. But nonetheless, the rally which started in Asia is certainly continuing here. I haven't seen the European markets in the last hour or so, but it's certainly continuing here. Dow is up 274 points, and the star of the day is the Nasdaq, up 220.
Well, as far as the US is concerned then, John, what should we be looking for the rest of this week?
Well, I tell you, there's a couple of things coming up this week. Of course, the G7, which I heard you reporting on at the top of our program today, and whatever is said there is likely to influence the markets a little bit. Not much, but a little bit. We've just had a Pentagon briefing here. Pentagon says they have 5,800 US troops on the ground at the airport at the moment, and they've evacuated 37,000 people. So there's two sets of figures which you haven't had in the program so far. The big one is Jackson Hole. Jackson Hole is an economic symposium, an international economic symposium. Happens every year. We've found out this year, like last year, it's going to be virtual again. But on Friday morning, the head of the central bank here, the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, is going to give a speech, and it is now thought that he might give the argument for not beginning to taper the huge asset buying that's been going on here to prop up the U.S. economy. So we'll see what happens regarding that. And then a couple of key earnings this week. Salesforce is a Dow Jones component, and JD.com is one of the ADRs, and they'll give us their earnings later this week as well. JD.com, you might like to know, stands for Jingdong.com. That's
John, thanks very much.
When you ring the bell in China, you go Jing Dong.
Thanks very much indeed, John. Good talking to you as always.
Thanks.
Well, shares in Britain's second biggest supermarket, Sainsbury's, jumped 15% to a 7-year high, and reports private equity firms are indeed circling with plans for potential takeover bids. More than $9.5 billion this year has seen an unprecedented buying spree, in fact, of British companies. In the first 6 months, buyout groups spent $45 billion of private equity cash. Let's take a look then at just some of the big deals currently in the works. Well, first of all, US semiconductor chip giant NVIDIA wants to take over chip designer ARM, but UK regulators are considering blocking that $40 billion deal. And there are question marks too over the Chinese firm Wingtech Technologies, which is behind a bid for Newport wafer fab. That's after the UK's National Security Advisor was ordered to investigate. British authorities are also set to look into possible security risks from a planned $3.6 billion acquisition for defence firm Ultra Electronics by rival Cobham in the US. And as we've reported recently, UK aerospace and defence group Meggitt is being fought over by US companies Parker, Hannafin and Transtein. Well, the battle over the supermarkets continues. British supermarket Morrisons is heating up. On Friday, it accepted an improved $9.5 billion offer from US private equity group Clayton, Dubilier and Rice, and a rival Fortress is considering whether or not to up its offer. And in the world of healthcare, US tobacco giant Philip Morris is after inhaler maker Vectura and has snapped up a 22.6% stake as it closes in on a $1.5 billion takeover bid. Well, earlier I spoke to Mark Oswald, Chief Economist and Global Strategist for ADM Investor Services, and I asked him why there is such a big interest in the UK right now.
Well, I think one always has to go back to the idea that interest rates are very, very low. The UK market has definitely underperformed many of its European counterparts, let alone, obviously, a lot of American companies. And that was in part due to the Brexit process, which created a lot of uncertainty and detracted people from getting involved. Now that there is less uncertainty, and I think I stress less, not more certainty. There are obviously attractions there, particularly in a world where people are looking for companies which can generate real returns in inflation-adjusted terms. And on that basis, there are a lot of strongly cash-generative UK companies, and therefore they become fair game in that environment, particularly with people so desperate to find better returns given the alternatives elsewhere.
And Mark, it's true to say, isn't it, that we are looking at the inevitable march of globalisation happening, and this is just part of that process. But will it lead to UK job losses? If these companies get ported overseas and then make redundancies in the UK, is that something that we need to worry about?
I think one has to sort of consider who's being targeted at the moment. For instance, if one looks at Morrisons, it is largely a UK company. So the job losses are likely to be minimal, other than from the perspective that maybe someone comes in with better processes. But in general, they shouldn't. More internationally based companies and companies which are involved in the tech sector, that's a different issue. But on the other hand, those sort of companies, particularly in the tech sector, aren't exactly big employers. So more than likely, actually, it would probably create jobs rather than lose jobs.
So the bricks and mortar assets will stay. And this isn't a new idea, is it? We've seen Walmart come into this sector, particularly the supermarket sector, before.
Yes, though obviously Walmart has since exited, and it does underline that there are considerable challenges. And a lot of the challenges in terms of UK companies, probably particularly anything which is reliant on imports of goods or exports of goods, we've probably muddied the water a little with the whole COVID, having to deal with COVID. And we're probably not necessarily seeing the complete impact of the new Brexit environment in terms of global trade. And that will have to be something which companies have to consider very, very carefully. Because their assessment, in a COVID-related environment, is not necessarily the one which is going to be in place after we've got to a degree of normalcy, as the Americans like to say.
Is the UK attracting more business than it can cope with? I'm thinking about the regulatory bodies and the capacity that they have to process these applications. We've seen a couple of reversals on approvals lately.
Well, I think the UK's regulatory capacity has been revealed to be, shall we say, not exactly very robust. The reversal in terms of the Chinese takeover of the wafer company, I would have to stress that there's two different aspects here. One is a pure competition aspect. Is someone capturing too much of a market? The other one is a national security issue, and we are rolling back towards the Cold War in that sense, that anything which is considered to be a national champion, which might leave the country vulnerable to some sort of security interference, will become an issue. Whether the UK regulatory bodies are capable of dealing with it, I think is a matter of some debate, and I think it will continue to be a matter for some debate. And obviously there is quite a lot of noise in the UK because the media in the UK are so hypercritical of anything which government does.
Still to come on CGTN, the AI and high-tech promising us an easier tomorrow. We'll be at the 2021 Smart China Expo in Chongqing.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, making it loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Andrew Wilson and Polly Middlehurst. A reminder of our main stories. The Taliban has warned foreign troops they must leave by the end of the month as the group consolidates control over Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, China has reported no new local coronavirus cases for the first time since July, giving a boost to the stock market.
And shares have surged in the British supermarket giant Sainsbury's on reports it could be next in line for a private equity takeover.
Back to Afghanistan now, and the Taliban has managed to take control of the country just 4 months after the US announced its troop withdrawal plan. The Afghan army, largely trained by US forces, collapsed against what many believe was a more organised and motivated unit.
And with the Taliban now in control, many who supported the Afghan government say they fear for their safety and are desperate to leave. Caroline Malone explains how the past few months played out.
US President Biden announced back in April that it was time to end America's longest war by withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. He said the US had accomplished what it set out to do, getting the people responsible for 9/11, delivering justice to Osama bin Laden and reducing the threat of terrorists using Afghanistan as a base from which to attack the US. As US troops began withdrawing, the Taliban mobilized. They set up outposts along the country's main roads. By the end of May, as US airstrikes decreased, the Taliban launched attacks on Logar, Ghazni, Zabul provinces. They massed in Helmand, attacking the capital, Lashkargah. By July 2, the United States announced it had vacated Bagram Air Base, which used to be the center of operations. Afghan officials say the US left in the dead of night, turning off the electricity and leaving hundreds of armored vehicles behind. The US carried out airstrikes in Kandahar to support Afghan forces against the Taliban. By early August, the Taliban had advanced, attacking major cities including Herat. They seized the provincial capital of Nimruz province on the border with Iran. The Taliban also took control of scores of other provinces, including Jawzgan, Kunduz, Saripul, Samangan and Takhar. As the Taliban advanced, US intelligence officials who'd originally warned Kabul could be taken in 6 to 12 months said it could happen within a month. US President Biden said Afghanistan's future was in the hands of its leaders.
I think they're beginning to realize they've got to come together politically at the top. But we're going to continue to keep our commitment. But I do not regret my decision.
After fierce fighting, the Taliban took Mazar-e-Sharif, the capital of northern Balak province, as well as the city of Asadabad, Bagram, Parwan and Kunar province. The president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, flees the country, and by August 15, the Taliban took over the capital, Kabul. They set up checkpoints in key areas, including the Green Zone, home to embassies. US President Biden again defended the decision to withdraw, saying that Americans should not be fighting and dying in a war that Afghan forces weren't willing to fight for themselves. But by that point, the US had also sent thousands of troops back to Afghanistan to help evacuate thousands of Americans and Afghans. And on August 16th, scenes of panic at Kabul airport. Thousands of Afghans rushed onto the tarmac, desperately trying to escape, some even holding onto an American military jet as it took off. At least 7 people died in the chaos. Thousands more are left fearing for their lives, with Afghanistan now in the control of the Taliban. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
Leaders in Central Asia have agreed to coordinate joint action on Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover. And in an online summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin voiced concerns that the Islamic State group still had a foothold in Afghanistan and continued to be a threat. Stuart Smith is live for us in Moscow. Stuart, good to talk to you. That's an interesting conversation. What do we know about what was said?
Well, it was indeed a top-level meeting with most of the states affected by the situation in Afghanistan. We know the conclusion came out that the importance of the responsible restoration of state power in Afghanistan through peaceful dialogue, taking into account the interests of all groups in the country, is the priority for the CSTO states. Russia saying, though, that it will not be involved in any form of mediation, and especially not military intervention. At the end of the day, the CSTO is a military alliance. In effect, Russia's answer to NATO, and the states involved are all in an agreement whereby one state helps the other if one feels under attack or vulnerable. And in particular, concerns for Tajikistan, which shares a 1,300-kilometre long border with Tajikistan. It's the CSTO state with the longest border with Afghanistan. And to come out of this meeting, some concrete proposals for further military exercises to be held on the Tajik-Afghanistan border, and also speeding up of a program to further strengthen that border. In addition, we heard that the CSTO states have a number of concerns. One of those is, of course, terrorism. President Putin of Russia declaring once again that Islamic State is still very strong in Afghanistan. But there's also this concern that refugees who are being evacuated from Afghanistan, some by Western nations, some moving into the CSTO states with their help, could potentially be militants in disguise, and this could be an opportunity to export the Islamist mindset to these Central Asian nations. That's one of President Putin's big concerns, but the CSTO states also have concerns around drugs. Will Afghanistan once again become a haven for drug trafficking?
And Stuart, can we expect this axis of concerned countries to broaden and include others fairly soon?
Well, that is one of the things that CSTO Secretary General mentioned could happen, whether this alliance should be broadened to include the SCO states. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes very big players like China, India and Pakistan, who also share a border with Afghanistan. He says it makes sense to include discussions with these countries as well. We've also heard President Putin of Russia say time and time again that he believes it should be the United Nations Security Council at the forefront of talks on Afghanistan, and today he mentioned possibly the G20 nations. But one thing was very clear from this meeting, Belarus's Alexander Lukashenko mentioning that there is no way, and all CSTO states should agree, that United States troops and NATO allies should be allowed to overfly CSTO states on their way to Afghanistan, nor should US troops be allowed to be deployed in states such as Uzbekistan and Tajikistan.
Stuart, thanks very much indeed. Stuart Smith there in Moscow for us.
Now, Belarus has been accused of deliberately allowing migrants to cross the country and enter the European Union. Poland says it will build a fence along its border with Belarus to stem that flow. Well, Penelope Lish joins me now from Budapest. Thanks for speaking to us, Penelope. Practically speaking, then, how does all this work? How are Afghans getting to Belarus?
Well, Polly, in the last few months, the EU and a number of countries in this region have accused Belarus and the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko of actually flying migrants, particularly from Iraq and Turkey, into the capital Minsk and then driving them towards the land borders where they then cross on foot. Now, this has been confirmed by a number of migrants themselves who in the last few months have made it to Lithuania, which saw the original brunt, the largest numbers of migrants travelling in, around 4,000 already crossing illegally into the country, according to the Lithuanian government this year, compared to under 1,000 for all of last year. So those numbers are continuing to spill out into Poland and Latvia as well, particularly as Lithuania has cracked down on border patrols there and begun building a fence themselves. So it really is an issue between Belarus and the European Union countries, who believe that Belarus is really pushing back against restrictions and sanctions that have been placed on the country recently following the disputed election and subsequent crackdown on protests in the region. Alexander Lukashenko himself has said he will not hold back migrants who are trying to get to the European Union, that he is reacting in some ways to these sanctions and doesn't plan to stop. So it does seem at this point that this is an issue that will continue, particularly as more people try to enter the European Union and perhaps become more desperate because of the issues that are going on in Afghanistan at the minute.
Penelope, we've seen a fairly sturdy wall go up in Greece to prevent Afghan migrants getting into the country, and a fence in Poland. What difference will a fence make?
Well, in some cases, it may deter people coming to the borders. Some of those migrants who have spoken to media from Lithuania have themselves said they simply headed for that border because they'd heard it was open and a free way to get into the European Union. So perhaps knowing that there is a fence to stop them may stop some people. Lithuania has already begun building a fence. They started back in July. It's going to be 500 kilometres long. It's not due to be finished until September next year. So even though Poland has announced today that they'll also be building a fence, it's certainly not going to stop people anytime soon, and people in desperate situations are likely to continue to build up on those borders, whether there's a fence or not, perhaps coming into contact with the many soldiers and border guards that have been deployed around the European Union. They may also just begin to build up in other areas. Latvia has also seen a significant increase in migrants, and other areas through the Balkans. So it may stop some people or stop people at a hard border, but they will continue to find other ways to try and get into the European Union, particularly as they seek a new life away from Afghanistan and other parts of that region. As we know, as you just said, there is significant pressure on Greece from migrants, the government often saying that they're bearing the brunt of migrants there as well. So it's unlikely to stop the migrant crisis and just push them into other parts of the European Union.
Penelope Leash, thanks very much indeed.
The Taliban takeover has raised fears of a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan that could see the country plunged back into mass poverty. This week, CGTN Europe is launching a new series on global poverty, its causes, and how it can be prevented. War and Want looks at the role of the conflict, particularly in developing nations. To see more, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Now, Ukraine has called for international support to secure the future of Crimea at a summit on the region's future. President Volodymyr Zelensky told diplomats and officials from 46 countries that Ukraine will use all possible legal and diplomatic means to regain control of the peninsula. Crimea was taken over by Russia 7 years ago in a military campaign following the Ukrainian Revolution.
US Vice President Kamala Harris has reaffirmed links between America and Southeast Asia during a trip to Singapore. Speaking alongside Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, Harris spoke of a long-standing and enduring relationship with Singapore, stressing security and economic ties to the region. He also met semiconductor manufacturers to discuss supply chain issues which have hampered recovery in the American and global car sector.
Storm Henry, which was downgraded to a tropical depression, could now trigger floods after drenching northeast America. Initially thought to be a hurricane, Henry weakened faster than expected as it made landfall on Rhode Island, sparing the area from severe wind damage. Well, it's now moving slowly across southern New England, and forecasters are warning of more heavy rain.
At least 22 people have been killed by severe floods in the southern U.S. state of Tennessee. At least 20 others are still missing. The flood, caused by record rainfall over the weekend, uprooted trees, tore through homes and overturned cars.
Train drivers in Germany have begun a 48-hour strike, severely disrupting passenger services right across the country. It's the second time this year that members of the GDL union have walked out in their dispute with Deutsche Bahn over pay, pensions and working conditions. The union is demanding a 3.2% pay rise and a $700 coronavirus bonus for staff.
The gender pay gap remains large among the UK's biggest companies, according to a new report. Female FTSE 100 directors are being paid an average of $325,000, which is a fraction of the $1.2 million their male counterparts make. New Street Consulting Group found the pay gap at board level is mainly because the majority of women hold non-executive jobs, which attract lower salaries.
You're watching Global Business Europe from CGTN in London. Still to come. Food of the future. We meet the robot chefs transforming restaurant kitchens in Shanghai. That's next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for the Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special 1 hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
And you're with CGTN, welcome back. The 2021 Smart China Expo has opened in the city of Chongqing, a major showcase event for artificial intelligence and new high-tech gadgetry, all aimed at making our lives easier. Nicole Ng reports.
This is just the 4th ever Smart China Expo, but this year over 600 companies are taking part, both online and right here at the Chongqing International Expo Center.
A wide range of technologies on show. We've seen firefighting robots, AI-controlled traffic, even elevators that use sound sensors. Innovative solutions tackling problems from climate change to language translation. The theme of this year's expo, empowering the economy and enriching lives.
Now, many of us are familiar with electric cars, but on show here is even newer technology. This car, for example, can drive itself, but it can also do things like park and change lanes.
It's able to do that through the use of advanced sensors.
All in all, there are 15 cameras and 12 sensors. For example, here are the sensors. If I stand here, the car will let you know inside on the screen how far I am and where the obstacle is. In the front, there's a millimeter wave radar. It can sense things up to 250 meters away.
Now, safety isn't the only thing automakers are working on. This company is dedicated to making cars 100% green, developing hydrogen fuel cells to extend the range of electric vehicles. The only byproduct, water. But there's still a way to go with this technology.
Well, firstly, there are a few problems. One is the cost. Right now, you could say that hydrogen is still in its developmental stage, so it's maybe similar to how lithium batteries were 10 years ago.
It may be another decade until hydrogen is used in your average car. Until then, automakers focusing on bringing smarter and greener solutions to our roads. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
Digital transformation, automation and AI, catchwords that are becoming ever more crucial for companies wanting to boost business, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated that change.
But while we're all used to robots building our cars and computers sending us bank statements, what about robots making your lunch? Ying Junyi reports.
Steamed, fried or baked, all the food in this Changning District canteen is prepared by an AI cooking system. Hungry diners only need to put an empty bowl or plate in the right spot to place their order. The cashiers are also AI-based. Customers pay for their lunch by putting it under a camera, which does the scan and shows the price. Everyone seems to like the service and the meals.
Children like seeing the yellow robot cooking noodles. I brought my father here too, and he also enjoyed the noodles because they are well cooked.
The food here is clean and high quality. I choose whatever I like and it tastes good.
The AI system also keeps track of what dishes are ordered and tells the robots to get ready in advance for the most popular ones. It's enabled the canteen to cut its staff by more than 50%, and the designer says there are plans for a good many more installations like this one.
还有一些我们目前在沟通的很多。
We are going to be working with schools, hospitals, and factories. By the end of the year, there will be dozens of canteens opened using the system. Some catering companies also want to use our system to improve their kitchen, as the no-touch system and equipment can support COVID-19 prevention.
这样的话，对防范疫情是很有帮助的。
Of course, it's not just a heightened desire for contactless interaction that increases the demand for AI technology. Many companies have started using AI now because it frees up time for workers trapped in repetitive tasks ripe for automation. Experts caution, however, that since AI applications like this are based on a large quantity of collected data, protecting that data and managing it properly inevitably becomes an issue.
We
have seen burgeoning applications of AI in many sectors, but the development of AI technology depends on data collected by the applications, and some of that could be private information. So many companies are also working on how to use AI while protecting the privacy of individuals.
On Friday, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress passed China's first private information protection law to prevent businesses from collecting sensitive personal data and to crack down on crimes like online fraud and data theft. The law takes effect in November. Ying Junyi, ICS for CGTN Shanghai.
Before we go, the Paris Pantheon, the last resting place of French national icons such as Voltaire, Victor Hugo, Pierre and Marie Curie, is to get an injection of jazz-age glamour. Josephine Baker, the French-American singer and dancer, is to be commemorated there, making her the first black woman to be given that honor. She was born in Missouri in 1906, and then Baker made her home and her name in Paris in the 1920s and 30s, becoming France's highest-earning entertainer. During World War II, she served in the French Resistance. Baker, who died in 1975 in Monaco, will be inducted into the Pantheon in November.
Our top stories today. The Taliban warns foreign troops they must leave by the end of the month as the group consolidates its control over Afghanistan.
The evacuations from Kabul continue. European nations stepping up efforts to bring nationals and vulnerable Afghans to safety. And meanwhile, American officials have admitted that getting people out remains a major challenge.
There's a lot of people, and they are desperate. And we are trying to do the best we can to get them out of harm's way as fast as possible. And when you have a throughput problem, it means that some people are going to be stuck in a given location, whether it's at Hamid Karzai International Airport or Qatar or other temporary safe havens. Nobody wants to see this go on for any longer than it has to be.
Give another look at our top story for the day. Those are the scenes at Kabul airport as the G7 leaders prepare to meet tomorrow to have a difficult, crucial conversation about what exactly they're going to do about this self-imposed deadline of August the 31st, with the United States is going to pull out its last remaining troops from Kabul. The UK and European leaders think they need more time, and that's going to be the difficulty they're trying to discover in this conversation that's taking place tomorrow. A difficult one it's going to be. Those are the scenes from the airport there.
And within the last hour, our reporter on the ground in Kabul telling us that despite these scenes at the airport, life returning back to what can be described as normal, saying people are walking around the streets calmly, restaurants and cafes opening once again, and people finally going to the shops and opening the markets. So a sign that things slowly returning to normal in Kabul.
It's almost a tale of two cities now. That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're also on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Well, coming up next on CGTN, Africa Live. We'll see you at the same time again tomorrow from all the team here in London. Goodbye.